Why did Joyboy fail against Imu and the world government, whereas Luffy will succeed? What is the most important difference between the stories of these two characters? The answer is their crews. "Forgive me, Joyboy," are the first words out of Emeth's mouth. And if we look at all the foreshadowing and evidence and hints we have of Joyboy's story and the reason of his downfall, and we contrast that with all the messaging we've had across all 1100 chapters of One Piece, as to what Luffy's single most important, unique asset is, the key to his success, the simple idea being built up is that Joyboy's crew failed him in a fundamental way in which the Straw Hat Pirates will not fail Luffy. Confused? No idea how I could make such a definitive claim about Joyboy's crew that they are the reason for his defeat when we know so little about them? Well, that's where you're wrong, because we actually do know a lot about Joyboy's crew. Every chapter we can piece together more and more of what actually happened, and the most important underlying concept you need to remember is that storytelling always has purpose. The real question you need to be asking is, why does the story of Joyboy even matter in the first place? Why did Oda even write Joyboy in? Remember, there was technically no need to have written Joyboy in the first place. Joyboy's prominence and relevance in the story is actually a very recent addition. For decades, we thought that this whole conflict was just generally about an ancient kingdom which was defeated, and the kingdom in general left behind a will for future descendants of the kingdom. And that was a good enough reason for us to be invested in the story of Luffy and the Straw Hats, carrying out that will and bringing the dawn of the world. It's actually only in the last 150 chapters or so that we've been told new information, that there was actually a protagonist figure in the ancient kingdom, Joyboy, who was like an ancient version of Luffy, and he failed in some way. This is a significant additional component to the story, one that I'm sure Oda likely always planned, of course, but the question is why? Why did Oda decide from the start that this ancient kingdom needed a protagonist figure that was just like Luffy? And why did Oda decide that the fall of this ancient kingdom was actually specifically tied to the defeat of this Luffy figure? Again, storytelling always has a purpose, so if Oda is choosing to include this tale of an ancient version of Luffy, a freedom-loving pirate, the previous awakened Nika user, the first wearer of the Straw Hat, who failed in some fundamental way that resulted in the fall of the ancient kingdom, then what could Oda be saying with this story as it pertains to the modern-day Luffy's story? What is the point of it all? What is the point of the contrast of Luffy's predecessor failing, whereas Luffy will succeed and do what he could not? Well, since the story of Luffy succeeding where Joyboy failed will be what ends the entire story of One Piece, the differentiating point between Joyboy's failure and Luffy's final success will naturally be stamping in the most important message of Luffy's entire character arc, something that Luffy has or has gained over the course of his long journey that differentiates him from his predecessor. That specific aspect of Luffy's character journey will be the true reason for why Luffy is the one who is meant to succeed and bring the dawn to the world. Now keep in mind, Oda has spelled out what this aspect is for us a million times throughout the story. The most important thing Luffy has is not his strength, it's not his will, it's not his free spirit, it's not his dreams. No, none of that would amount to anything if not for his friends. Luffy's crew is his greatest strength. Luffy from the beginning of the story is in many ways a fully realized character. Many of the philosophies he has on dreams and freedom, kindness, and so on are already set in stone from the beginning, and much of the story is simply Luffy imparting these philosophies that he already knows onto others, largely through his actions. In many ways, Luffy is more like a force of nature, the incarnation of freedom, dreams, and willpower brought to life, tearing through the world like an ever-growing storm, liberating people wherever he goes. However, Luffy isn't perfect. No one wants to read the story of a perfect character, and in this regard, Luffy's simple flaw is that outside of combat and leadership, he is terrible at everything else. That's why Luffy needs his friends to do almost everything. So much of the messaging of One Piece and Luffy's journey is in how Luffy alone cannot become Pirate King. This journey is only possible because of Luffy's ability to draw similarly extraordinary people to him. The message that repeats throughout the Straw Hat's journey is, I'll do what you can't do, and you do what I can't do. That's why Luffy's most important character moment in the entire story was at the climax of the Marineford saga, where Luffy had seemingly completely and utterly failed, where all of his strength, his willpower, his drive, none of it was enough. And this was also very deliberately the same arc where Luffy was written to be fighting all by himself without any of his crewmates. The greatest lesson that Luffy realized at the end of this arc, what brought him out of his despair and brought back his belief in himself, was that it didn't matter if he'd fallen to rock bottom because he still had his crew. Even when Luffy no longer believed in himself, even when he had fallen completely and utterly short, he couldn't stop because his friends wouldn't stop until they picked him back up and made him Pirate King. And we see this sentiment across each one of his crewmates, that they are going to keep driving and driving until they take Luffy to the top. And that's why the very message that's been repeated since the time skip over and over again is how Luffy's crew will not let him down, and how Luffy himself knows that they are the key to him achieving his dreams. Luffy cannot achieve his dreams without them. As strong and powerful as Luffy is, his true strength has always been in those he brought to his side, and that is the explicit canonical sentiment that Oda established for us in Marineford. And that is precisely why when we look at the story of Joyboy and the likely contrast it is set to have with Luffy's story, well, the message that is developing is so clear. We know it's not like Joyboy failed because he wasn't as free-spirited or as big of a dreamer as Luffy. Joyboy awakened the Nika fruit just like Luffy. Joyboy was the first pirate to ever exist. Joyboy seemed to be the embodiment of freedom and dreams and willpower just as much as Luffy. So it's unlikely that Luffy has some personal strength that will allow him to defeat Imu and the Gorosei and the world government that Joyboy didn't have. So then what if the one area in which Luffy has surpassed Joyboy is in assembling a crew even greater than Joyboy once did? If we trace back the key moments of Luffy's entire character journey, that's really what it's always been about. From the starting point, Chapter 1, Luffy's metric for success that he set for himself was building a crew even greater than Shanks's. Then, at the halfway point of the story, traditionally where the hero falls and has some sort of realization where their character journey is put into perspective, while the messaging was all about Luffy's crew. Luffy failed in this Marineford saga where he didn't have his crew by his side, and this storyline was all about Luffy realizing that because he still had his crew, that he had not truly lost everything, and that he would still be able to climb to Pirate King. And this pivotal halfway point of the story was also where it was reiterated that Luffy's crew are the ones that he will always be able to rely on to pick him up when he falls. And so if we then look to the finale of the story, the upcoming concluding point to Luffy's character journey, then the natural climax to all this is a storyline that is heavily focused on the value of the Straw Hat crew to Luffy, wherein Luffy assembling this extraordinary group of individuals truly pays off and pushes Luffy over the finish line in a way that would not have been possible if he had done anything less than assemble the greatest crew of all time. And as such, that's naturally why the story of Joyboy is being written in at such a crucial point in the final saga. It's all about the juxtaposition. There is no better way to showcase how Luffy's crew is his greatest strength that will prevent him from failing no matter what than to juxtapose this finale with telling us the story of Joyboy, Luffy's predecessor and equal, whose crew ultimately failed him in some way. Again, the first words we hear from Emmett are, "Forgive me, Joyboy." Yes, Emmett seems like a strong fighter, but that doesn't change the fact that he is atoning for some failure. If we look at Zunisha, Zunisha has also been portrayed as a tragic figure in many ways, and Emmett and Zunisha seem to be very clearly being implied to be some of the remnants of Joyboy's crew. And while we can speculate on who the entirety of Joyboy's crew was, at the moment let's just focus on the sentiment that Emmett and Zunisha seem to exude, which is that of regret and atonement. Because these words, "Forgive me, Joyboy," in the wake of the death of one's leader, do you know what this is strikingly reminiscent of? A practically identical scenario, the story of the Scabbards and Odin. That's right, we all know that Oda is an author who plans far ahead, and then he actually uses ideas from the ending parts of his story to come up with ideas for earlier parts of his story. For example, Oda clearly drew inspiration from Imu and the Gorosei when he was planning out Doflamingo and his seats when Oda was writing the Dressrosa arc, as well as Enel and his priests when Oda was writing the Skypiea arc. as both the Dressrosa and Skypiea storylines featured narratives where an evil authoritarian leader with a god complex rules a land where they erase anyone who disobeys from history. This is very blatantly Oda drawing from the broader final conflict he had planned against Imu and the world government in order to craft the plots of his earlier arcs as he came up with them. And so looking at the story of Oden and his scabbards, as I talked about at great length in this video, it seems like Oda largely drew inspiration from what the story of Joyboy and his crew was planned to be. To begin with, the Scabbard story is that of a group of subordinates whose leader died long ago, whereas they have tragically managed to live on, just as the remnants of Joyboy's crew seem to still be tragically alive in the modern day despite their leader having died long ago. Beyond that, the defeat of Oden and the Scabbards caused the land of Wano to be overtaken by an evil regime, just as the defeat of Joyboy and his crew allowed the world to be overtaken by an evil regime. Now, the Scabbards who managed to survive and live on have since then been waiting for a certain time in the distant future wherein they can carry out their leader's will. And we see this exact same dynamic today with the remnants of Joyboy's crew. We see this with Zunisha, who has been walking for centuries, waiting for the promised time where he can one day be commanded by Momonosuke. Waiting for the promised time where he can one day be commanded to act. We see this with Emmet, who has been lying dormant all these centuries, till now this specific time has come for him to finally act to carry out Joyboy's will. And beyond that, in the broader sense, literally the entire concept in the Wano arc of the will of the Kazuki that was passed down through decades till the promised time where the Kazuki clan's will could rise up again and defeat the evil regime so Wano could be freed and the dawn could come to the land, well, that is beat for beat pulled from the broader story concept of the Will of D that was passed down through centuries till the promised time where the D clan could rise up and defeat the evil regime so the world could be freed and the dawn could come to the entire world. Wano's storyline and the general storyline of the Scabbards and Oden is so painfully, obviously pulled from Oda's larger story of the Will of D and Joyboy and his crew that it could not be any more on the nose. And that brings us back to the clear, most important point of similarity between the Scabbards and Joyboy's crew specifically, which is that both of them seem to be defined by the deep regret of failure. The Scabbards specifically say that while they existed to protect their lord Oden, ultimately he was the one who had to protect them. They are hounded by this sense of inadequacy, that as great as their lord was, they were not fittingly great subordinates for him. Their only way to atone and redeem themselves is by carrying out their leader's will 20 years later, and righting their failure from 20 years ago. This is damn near exactly the same thing we are starting to see from Joyboy's crew, Emmet waking up and begging for forgiveness for letting Joyboy down in some way. And then immediately after that, it being established that Emmet has a will of Joyboy's that he still needs to carry out today. It is the same as the Scabbards. You have subordinates living out a life long past their leader who they feel they failed in some way. The only thing that they can do now is wait for the promised time where they can get a second chance to help carry out their leader's will in the present day. It's the same exact way we see that Zunisha has some purpose that they are willing to carry out today. Zunisha is waiting on some will of Joyboy's that needs to be carried out that can only be achieved through Momonosuke. Hell, if we go back in time, we can see something similar with Lily. Lily made some sort of a mistake in the Void Century War. She and the Nefertari family actually fought against Joyboy and the Ancient Kingdom. We don't know why she made this mistake, but we know she then atoned for this mistake afterwards by betraying Imu and spreading the poneglyphs to pass on Joyboy's will to the world after his death. Joyboy's crew's story is the same as the Scabbard story because in general, Oden and the Scabbard story and the whole underlying plot of Wano are very clearly pulled from Oda's broader ideas on the overarching Will of D conflict of One Piece. The tragic hero who died protecting the kingdom, the will passed down, the prophecy, the dawn, it's all the exact same thing. And that's why we already know the shortcoming that Joyboy had. His crew let him down. The Scabbard story in the modern day is that of regret and atonement, just as the story of Joyboy's crew is shaping up to be one of regret and atonement. And the whole point is contrast because it all comes back to the true stars of the show, the key dynamic that the entirety of the story of One Piece is built upon, Luffy and the Straw Hats. I'm sure Joyboy's crew was formidable back in the day, but they were not the Straw Hat Pirates. Because the reality is, if Joyboy had a Zoro, a Sanji, a Nami, even an Usopp, then he is never losing to Imu and the Celestial Dragons. They simply would not allow him to fall. That is what we are going to read about when the time of the Void Century flashback comes, of a crew that couldn't live up to Joyboy's greatness in the Void Century War, who perhaps in a way had to be carried or protected by Joyboy, much like the story of Odin and the Scabbards. And that is precisely why we will see that in the modern-day Final War, the final arc of the story, the most important storyline that it's all been leading up to. It will be the Straw Hats who will get to shine in the spotlight, as their worth to Luffy becomes the front and center deciding factor of him succeeding in the final war. That's why it's explained that it's not just Luffy, it's the Straw Hats together who are the ones who can bring the dawn of the world. And Luffy and the Straw Hats being the centerpiece of the final arc and freeing the world is of course fitting with the most important message underlying all of One Piece's messages. It's not just a story about dreams, will, freedom, and so on. The most important idea above all of these is that bonds are what truly make all things in the world possible. No man is an island. You can achieve anything, but no one can achieve it all alone. It's the bonds that Luffy has made that will allow him to achieve everything he imagines, and that's why the story of Joyboy is important. Joyboy likely had a great crew, but they are plagued by the regret of letting him down, whereas the entire story of Luffy has been about building a crew that will pick him up no matter how hard he falls. So let me know how you think Joyboy's crew failed him in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe.